Alrighty. Hello, welcome to the third event of Eye for Design. Today we're going to be talking about design trends and whether or not we think that, it's a vibe or maybe we're not feeling it so much. So essentially, I'll just be giving you all kind of an overview of what's been happening. These are just a couple trends within the industry that you might notice as you're searching for inspiration in either track, graphic design or UX UI design. And kind of we'll talk about like why it's coming up and maybe where it's going, and then have a poll for each mood board to see whether or not, our current audience right now is feeling it or not. And feel free to also jot down what you think about each mood board and each trend in the chat feature, and I will be monitoring that as well. All right, so we'll kind of alternate between graphic design trends and UX UI trends. And so first off, we'll start with the graphic design trends. So first one, I'm sure you guys have seen kind of the 90s nostalgia trend in other industries as well, but especially in design, you'll see a lot of kind of like retro graphics or background graphics, like this geometric kind of squiggly and shaped pattern in a lot of backgrounds, or kind of like filler graphic areas. Or you might see a lot of illustrations about very old kind of like tech devices, like who remembers Tamagotchis, cassette tapes, floppy disks. So very early on in the internet era, and also very bright and kind of funky colors as well. So it's kind of like we're all in this digital age where, everything's being digitized, and with moving towards like a more and more virtual space. And so this trend is kind of calling back to like, oh, okay, like what it was like without all of these fancy gadgets, what it was like when technology was more of like a new kind of like wondrous innovation that was happening at that time. So a lot of childhood memories. I don't know if some of you kind of feel nostalgic looking at all of these or not, but what are we feeling? Do we like it or not? And let me also launch this poll. And feel free to also be, if you no shame if you're not feeling it, but it's okay. There's something for everyone here. Right, so a couple people, leave it on for like another minute or so. Oh, okay, it's very it's quite even between both opinions. Okay, I think that's everyone. So let me just share it. So some people like it, a couple people are like, not really for me, and that's totally okay. It's definitely a vibe, and pretty much calls for, a certain type of brief that you have to get. Let's see, in 40 years, do you think that there will be a 2020s nostalgia trend? Pretty much, honestly. Sometimes I kind of wonder what really defines these current years in terms of design and other industries as well, since I feel like it's getting more and more mixed up and jumbled together. But definitely, even now, the early 2000s are considered retro now. So who knows, maybe within our lifetime, we'll see 2020s retro vibe, which is going to make us feel very weird. Okay. Next one, for UX, UI, and product design. So these are called micro interactions. So essentially that they're placed on certain features, and they kind of add like a little extra something to whatever feature that you're adding it onto. So like with here, you see with the like button, there's like a small animation for when you press the like button versus when you unlike something, or maybe the sound button or the volume feature as you're moving the scroll side to side. So essentially, they just make the user engagement a lot more interesting as compared to something that's just like, oh, you just click the heart and it just fills up. So it's just something that adds a bit of interest and it's a bit fun as well. And usually they're just for like visual or sound effects that just serves to make that feature like a little less boring. I would caution if you ever get to the level of design where you're creating micro interactions that they should still be meaningful and they should still convey whatever information that you want it to create. So like, for example, with like this mail icon, you have this cute animation that's like makes the interaction or the experience of getting another notification a lot more interesting, but it's still telling you the relevant information you need to know, which is that you have another email that comes in, or with like this volume button, right? It's still telling you like the level of sound that you have, but in a more fun manner. So especially with your current prototypes for this project, you don't have to be fancy with micro interactions, but this is just a trend that more designers are getting into to make the experience a bit more interesting and to have a bit more complexity in their designs. So yes, I agree, Connie. I love these as well. Right, let me also redo this poll. All right, how do we feel about it? Okay, a lot of people are really feeling it. How hard are these to create in Figma? For animations, it might be a bit harder to create at least complex ones like these. You should be, if you really want to, you can create more simplified versions of these, especially as a starter. But for like the animation, like the like button where you want it to like fill up and also kind of like break in like a heartbroken type of imagery, that might require other programs, and then you'd have to input it into Figma. But there are a lot of cool micro interactions that you can still create. So an example would be like, if you hover over like a thumbnail and you want it to either like expand or get bigger, just to let you know that your cursor is over it, you are able to create that in Figma. Or if you want to create an animation of like, if there's like an arrow and you want it to show that there's like more, but you have to click on this arrow to show more. What I've done in the past was I've had it where you hover over the arrow and it gets longer. So something like that where it's a lot more simple. You can design those in Figma and prototype them. All right, next one, graphic design. So I think this one is a bit more common, or you might recognize this one more. It's abstract asymmetry. And these are pretty much used in a lot of like backgrounds for like accents in terms of color and design, and also to add a bit more of an aesthetic element to your overall design and make like either the background more interesting or just the whole graphic more interesting in general. If you have looked at ACM at designs work or just ACM socials in general, we do a couple graphics where we do abstract asymmetry here and there just to add a bit more dimension and interest within maybe like the background of our graphic or whatnot. So yeah, these are pretty much, they've come out of 2020 when like the geometric pattern kind of like was becoming more popular. And then it's continued the rise in the last couple of years. And so we're probably going to keep seeing it more and more as it's like something that's a bit more complex, but it's still simple enough where you can just slap it on a graphic and it still makes it interesting without trying too hard. So with this one, all right, how are we feeling about this one? All right. Okay, quite opposite. Yeah, I think these ones, you really have to think about the color palette when you're using it. And if it's just covering your whole graphic, it might be a little too much. So, but these are great to use as like an accent mark. For us, for ACM design, we tend to use like a lot of blobs in our design. So if we don't know what to do with the background, we just throw a blob in there and it'll just make it a bit more interesting in terms of the shape and the form of our design. But these are a little more complex. And yeah, it is definitely a choice, a design choice. Okay, for the next UI, UX, and product design, so we also have a trend called personalized experience, and another recognizable one from either your Facebook feed or your Instagram feed or Netflix and just in general, where this experience is comes from data, a lot of data-driven models, especially like how you as a user have been using this product in the past, how are you are using it now, like what exactly are you doing with certain features or not, and also like where you're using it in terms of like what situation and also location, since different products, you can use different products in different ways. One example would be like a GPS. You use it differently when you're walking compared to when you're driving. And then data-driven, an example of something data-driven would be like Netflix when you know, a movie or TV series pops up and you're like, they show you, hey, like this matches like maybe like 98% of like what the typical content you usually watch. Or it could be something that's user-driven or user-generated. So like you yourself set like certain filters or whatnot to customize your own experience rather than relying on an algorithm. So the purpose of this is just to retain interest as within the product. And a lot of designers, instead of using, you know, a general user persona to encapsulate to capture like a wide audience of like for specific features or specific scenarios, they're now thinking about the user in a more individualistic manner, just to help you as a user feel more emotionally connected to the product and feel like your specific experience matters within the product. So with this one, all right, how do we feel? Do you guys like the idea of an algorithm or like a product knowing what you want? Or is it like, oh, it's a little too much of technology knowing me? Oh, okay, let's see. A lot of people really like it. Well, interesting. I thought this one would be a bit more split down the middle. Okay, cool. Right, next one. This one is, I like to call it the return of like the millennial pink, but in a different form. So candy pastel colors, pastels were a really big color palette trend a couple years ago, and now they've kind of evolved to be a bit more brighter. And you'll see this, especially one example would be with ACM's color palette, where we rebranded our color palette for each of our committees to be a bit more brighter, just to invoke feelings, more positive emotions and more welcoming emotions within our branding. And same here, instead of using muted pastels, they're now brighter and bolder. And so they create a very strong, bold, yet friendly atmosphere. But they can still be a bit, you know, psychedelic here and there is a term that I've heard be used with these color palettes. So it essentially depends on how you use it. I think if you're looking at graphic design inspiration, you'll notice that a lot of the backgrounds are like some sort of pink or like periwinkle type of coloring in the background. So it's apparently a very neutral like design choice or color choice at the moment. And you'll see it a lot. You might see it in the future, or maybe other similar types of colors where it's like this bold and a bit more interesting color palette, but it's not as like, you know, monochrome or black and white or beige or like any type of neutral color. It's like more of a like a millennial pink, where it's like it's still color, but it's like relatively neutral. All right, and then this one. Ooh, okay. Most people like it. I would say it's a safe color palette to choose, but feel free to experiment with a lot of other type of color palettes as well. But it's definitely a popular one that you'll see a lot on like Dribble and Pinterest and other maybe Behance as well um, when you're looking at different graphic designs for inspiration. Okay, cool. This next one has to do with data visualizations. So you might be thinking, isn't this more, stats related, or isn't it more, data analysis related more than design? But you'll notice, especially with like, personalized experiences, you'll see that people want to know what goes on behind those decisions and like, how does the product know exactly what I want and how is it that accurate? Like what's going in it, like behind the scenes, but they don't necessarily want to know like all the nitty gritty details. So especially with data visualization, it's something that designers can provide in a very simple way, but also in an entertaining way. And I think one of the main examples that people are really hyped about is the Spotify Wrapped data visualizations that happen at the end of each year. Everyone really likes it. It's kind of like a fun way to for the product to say like, hey, we've been following you around for a year, but here's maybe a couple of data points that you might want to know about your experience within our product. So it's becoming a more and more valuable and expected part of the user experience where people want to know, like where these numbers come from and how they've been using these products. And it can help foster a more trusting relationship between the user and the product as well. So it's like numbers don't lie, that kind of scenario or that kind of sentiment, where you can design an interface that shows a bit more about the user's behavior and they can look at it and say like, okay, that's quite interesting. I've been using it this way in this manner and however much. And then it can be a better part of like their experience rather than like, like an infographic. It's not like, oh, here some data points and you see it and leave it, but this becomes like a more ingrained part of their experience or something that they might look forward to, especially with like something like Spotify. Okay, and with this one, kind of another similar question in terms of like tracking. Are you guys like okay with it? Is it something you would do as a designer or as a user? Okay, everyone's all for it. I think Spotify is making it very hard not to like these data visualizations within products UI. Oops. Okay, just in case I didn't share it. Okay. Next one is experimental typography. So especially for those who are getting into the habit of say like graphic design or branding products, typography is a really big factor that a lot of designers take into consideration in addition to things like styling and color palettes. So with experimental typography, you'll see a lot of posters and graphics where you might not necessarily have like a visual illustration to go with it. It might just be like a word mark, but to make the word mark more interesting, designers will tend to play around with like the styling and the font choices, just to make a word mark a little less boring than just a typical word mark. One thing to note is that a lot of designers typically use serif fonts. So if you don't know, serif fonts are basically like, think Times New Roman, where there's kind of like hooks at the end of each letter, compared to sans serif fonts like Open Sans, where it's more rounded and it's a lot more symmetrical. Everyone has their preference in terms of which style they like the most, and they're both quite readable. But with serif fonts, again, the Times New Roman type of font, you have a bit more recognizability within each letter, especially like say like with a T, there's like hooks on the ends of the T and R's and the A's. So if you do any hardcore styling, kind of like this low-key word mark here, all those hooks will make, you can go wild with your experimentation in typography, but all those hooks will still make it recognizable for the user. So they're not, looking really hard and thinking like, what exactly is this trying to say? Let's see. Elliot, I'm not sure. It's weird because when I get targeted ads, I feel uncomfortable, but when I get things such as movie recommendations and music recommendations, I am generally welcoming. Yeah, I think it depends on like the scenario that you get data uh, data visualizations or personalized experiences. But yeah, definitely, I see what you mean. So yeah, with experimental typography, how are we feeling? Let me relaunch this. Ooh, okay, most people are liking it. Let me end it here and share it. All right. I think it's a lot more common in like movies and TV shows where you might not necessarily have, a photo or some sort of illustration to go with the actual series or the piece of content that you're promoting. So it's kind of a nice touch to make something stand out or like a word mark stand out. Does the far left one say seal? I thought that was a D, but not sure what it entirely means. I just kind of grabbed it. Yes, I agree. It's very, you have to make your choices so that it's readable. It kind of comes with the conversation we had yesterday about how to balance artistic elements with readability. Yeah, if you are going for that type of look where you want users to appreciate the art and aesthetic behind your design, then sure, go for it. But if you really want to have users understand like the message behind the graphics, yeah, definitely, I'd say watch the styling and artistic elements just to make sure your users can be able to read it. Okay, this is a pretty much a fan favorite across the board, I would say, especially amongst most of my friends in tech, but dark mode. So in the past, dark mode has typically been used as like a choice in terms of users' preferences. And this can go alongside of like how they're actually using the product. Are they using it more at night, where, something in light mode would strain their eyes more, or do they just prefer dark mode compared to light mode? Do they find it more aesthetically pleasing? So it used to be more of a choice. And within design, it would be considered good design to have a choice in the matter and to let users themselves pick if they want something to be in dark mode versus light mode. But now we're seeing a lot more products having dark mode as like the default in UX, since a lot of users and designers seem to prefer it a lot more. And there's many pros that come with dark mode. Again, it's like less straining on the eyes. It can reduce your battery usage on certain phones. It looks a lot nicer and cleaner sometimes as well. So it's an aesthetic choice, but it can also help to de-stress the user, especially if like you're using your phone a lot at night compared to during the day. One thing to note is if you are designing in dark mode, you can't use the same color palettes between light mode and dark mode. And what I mean by this is especially for CTA colors or colors of buttons, or especially something like this, where it's like this like kind of lavender, light blue, periwinkle-ish color. It's not gonna look the same if you make this all light mode and keep that same color tone. So that's something to note, is that your colors will look different and you have to adjust the tones of each color when you're designing in different modes. Another thing is, especially for us at ACM design, we tend to not use pure black. We think it's the contrast might be too harsh on people's eyes. So especially say like with this middle frame here, you'll see like the background is a lot darker, but say like the actual content that like these boxes where the content you want your users to interact with is a bit lighter. So it's not like compared with a dark background with white text, it's not going to hurt your eyes as much. So that's just like a design choice to note. Yeah, a lot of thought goes into dark mode. So if you're designing in dark mode, do a bit more research into it, just understand the differences between the two because there's a lot that goes on. All right, and then with this, how many are fans of dark mode versus light mode? I have to admit, I keep most of my applications in light mode, but apparently I'm the weird one. Oh, okay, most people like it. Yeah, that's typically like I think that's the trend design is going towards right now, where a lot of people like it. So designers are trying to cater to that user base. Yeah, I'd say just still keep it as a choice if you do decide to do dark mode, but there's no fault in making your interface dark mode as the default. Yes, I'm with you, Tiffany, team light mode. All right, for graphic design, a mashup of 2D and 3D. So you'll see kind of like this almost like scrapbooky like feel, or where you kind of mix and match different techniques to create a whole new graphic. And this is kind of where this mashup of 2D and 3D comes in. So 3D graphics really came to be, especially last year, they gained a lot of popularity, and you can create 3D graphics through programs like Blender, which is like a computer graphics tool that allows you to create 3D graphics. But then you also have like very sketchy, doodly, hand-drawn 2D graphics or 2D illustrations that are, making their own comeback. And so some people like to combine the two and kind of make this whole new style where you have the freedom and authenticity of 2D illustrations, but you kind of add like this surrealist effect with hyperrealism with in your 3D graphics and 3D elements as well. So it kind of mashes this digital and physical world that we kind of live in. Very fitting for the current moments right now, but also a bit surrealist and psychedelic, dreamlike type of qualities that go within it. For me, I'm not sure how I feel about it quite yet, but it is a trend that is up and coming, especially with programs, designers being more trained in programs like Blender and then Figma and illustration. So they're combining all their techniques, and then this is what comes out of it. So how are we feeling? Oh, interesting. Most people are liking it. Okay. I wonder, would you guys prefer to see this type of illustration, or would you compare to like drawing it or creating it yourself? Yeah, visually more interesting. I would agree with that. Okay, we are almost done. So again, short presentations just so you guys have more time to work on your projects. But next trend is voice user interface. So think like Alexa, Cortana, OK Google, Hey Siri type of situation. Hopefully me saying that did not activate your phones. It just did for mine. But essentially for VUIs, they're meant to create like a more natural experience with the product. So where you're like talking with the product compared to like using your hands and typing, kind of like you're talking to a friend or like an actual personal assistant. That's kind of what they're trying to mimic. It's also a way for you to practice accessible design if you ever get into that field where, there is a user base out there that would much prefer voice user interfaces compared to something more tangible and like typing out a command. So that's one thing to know, is if you are moving towards like accessibility and inclusion within your design, this is a great practice to include. But you'd have to just do a lot more research just to see like what are the typical VUIs out there, because right now it's like still up and coming. It's still being developed. Like at the moment, probably like maybe a couple years ago, VUIs weren't recognizing accents or different tones in people's voices. If people have like deeper voices versus higher pitched voices, or understanding slang terms. But now we're getting towards the point where it's picking up all of that, and it's getting more accurate with the way we naturally speak. So maybe in the next few years, we'll see a more perfected version of VUIs and a more common application of them. But just an up and coming trend to keep an eye out for. And just in case I didn't say the definition, they're basically, it's a feature that lets users interact with the product by speaking or using a voice command. All right, so with this trend, how are we feeling? Nice. Cool, we are all down for it. I think at the moment, maybe the UIs for voice commands and voice features probably like are still being developed. Might not be the best at the moment, but they'll get there, I think. All right, another graphic design trend is ecology and nature. Ooh, let's see. Personally won't use it, but advocate for accessibility. I don't know. Have you ever been in a situation where both your hands are full and you want to ask for directions or to call someone? I mean, I've been in that situation. So maybe. You are good, Tiffany. Don't worry. All right. So eco and nature. So again, this kind of goes into the too much digitization of our world, too much technology, all that sort. So it's kind of the embodiment of too much screen time, go outside, spend time outdoors type of situation within graphic design. And so you'll see it in a lot of graphics that feature kind of like imagery of nature. It's adding natural beauty and peace to like this hectic technological world that we're in. And it's also being used in some cases to create positive emotions within the users or within people who are just viewing it, like happiness and joy, which can help with branding a lot, especially if your brand is trying to go in a more sustainable route, or if they advocate for like climate change. It's something that creates a more kind of like natural association of like happiness and positivity with your brand or with your product. So this one. Okay. We're all for it. Nice. I will say there are some interesting graphics out there, but especially with branding, if you're basing your branding on something that's very nature-based or sustainability-based, kind of an interesting thing to note, like we mentioned yesterday, is like how do you balance artistic elements with recognizability? So maybe uses of natural colors versus imagery, balancing the two just to create a more artistically interesting graphic to use. Okay, next one is responsive design. So this has been a thing. Essentially, responsive design is means your design is able to adapt to different screen sizes instead of being, shrunken down or expanded, where all your content is really kind of squished or spaced out. You're able to kind of reformat your design based on the different screen sizes of the of like phones and tablets or whatever devices that we use. So with responsive design, At like a common example is like if you open your browser and you minimize it, or like you play with like the sizing of the window, you'll see how all like the formatting changes and like how the design itself kind of changes to fit within the new window size. So it's essentially creating like that fluid user interface to adjust to the different screen sizes. The reason why I put this on here, even though it has been a thing, is because of new devices like AI and VR devices, AR devices as well. Sorry, AR and VR devices, and car screens as well, where we are having a lot more screens around us, and there's no longer like a typical frame size or a default frame size that we use, even within like phones, right? Our phones screens are changing, every year. And they're no longer, some of them are no longer like your typical rectangle of a screen. It's now, sometimes there's like odd shapes that you have to kind of tackle on with your design. Or now you have like for TV screens or computer screens, you have like really extra wide screens that you have to design for now. So there's no longer like a very generic, typical, like, oh, you should design for like this type of phone screen or this type of tablet. They all come in like different dimensions now. And so your designs, in terms of responsive designs, should be able to adapt to all those sizes. So it's a lot of work on the designer, honestly, to like have this into consideration, especially when you're starting out. But as you get more practice with designing for different frames, you'll better understand like, okay, as you shrink a screen or as you expand a screen, this is kind of like the typical flow that I want my layout to follow. And because you've thought that through, then there's kind of like no, I guess like there's a more like natural or fluid experience that for your users if they're switching from device to device. Okay, with this one, okay, interesting. I thought that some people would be like, oh, that's just so much work as a designer, but it seems like you all are for it. Maybe as a user, you guys are. Cool. Okay, next one for graphic design. I might butcher this, so I am so sorry if I do. It's called ukiyo-e, flat design. So it's very much inspired by the artists of Japan's Edo period, where you had like the hand-carved woodblock art installation. So think of it, think of like the Great Wave wood carving, very similar to that type of art style, where you have bold outlines, flat colors, limited perspectives, and it adds they're bringing back that technique to add interest to contemporary flat designs. So these are a bit more like modern examples of this type of design style. And so for some graphics, you might see kind of like this layered or perspective style where it's like you have a lot of things in the foreground and also in the background. The information hierarchy is kind of a lot. But it adds interest visually as like an artistic element if you're going for just like an illustration for a design. Okay, and then this one. How are we feeling? Okay, yes, it is definitely a style that people choose to use in certain graphics and certain design briefs, but it is an option if it's something that kind of aligns with what you're going for artistically. Okay, cool. All right, this last one for design trends in general. You all probably have heard about this before, but it's like VR and the metaverse. So essentially, a lot of tech firms are now creating a virtual world where users are being connected to each other within like a purely virtual and digital space. Sometimes by a VR device, other times by other programs, but it's pretty much like entering this whole digital virtual world. And you can see this with sometimes like virtual meetings. You might have like an avatar to speak for you, or sometimes like a virtual like game situation. But a lot of companies and firms are turning towards exploring, I guess, like this trend that's happening at the moment. So one thing to note is if you ever design for like a virtual space is how this certain situations or certain scenarios should differ in terms of the experience from like a real life situation or scenario versus like a purely virtual scenario. There might be differences to consider. And I added this on here because not only like you might be thinking like Facebook all the way, but a lot of firms are taking note about like the metaverse and are seeing ways that they can kind of integrate their own products within their own metaverse. So maybe one of these days we'll have like a purely VR world where everyone's kind of just in it. Or there could be kind of like this backward movement of like, this is way too technical for us, kind of go back into like the real person, real life experiences within the actual world. So this one might be split down the middle, but let's see how we feel. All right, yes, we are split down the middle. Great, interesting. Yeah, it might be something you see. It might be one of those trends that dies out. We won't know until later on, but an interesting thing to think about as a designer in terms of like, how would you design for a purely virtual space? Okay, and that is it for today's presentation. Hopefully you guys found some inspiration through these trends. Feel free to pull from them. Feel free to look at other trends. Like, again, this is just like a small selection of the current trends that are out there. But yeah, this is just purely to get you guys into like the mindset of a designer and understand what's kind of happening in the design world around us at this moment. And so with that being said, let me stop this recording.